The Inergize Cold Plunge is an inflatable ice bath with a Wi-Fi-enabled chiller infiltration system that cools the water down to as low as 37 degrees Fahrenheit. However, the chiller can also heat the water to 105 degrees, effectively turning your cold plunge into a hot tub, if that's what you're after. If you've been following me for a while, you probably know that I've tested and I own several cold plunges. In fact, this is the 6th cold plunge we've added to the ever-growing Coomer Home Spa. And after a month of testing, I'm thrilled to share with you everything you need to know about this cold plunge and whether or not it's worth your money. So let's start with what's in the box. When you make the purchase, what do you get and how easy it is to set up? Well, the Inergize Cold Plunge comes in 2 separate boxes. One is the chiller, which weighs about 60 pounds, so it's not exactly lightweight. And the other one contains the inflatable tub, the inflatable lid, and a bunch of accessories, including a repair kit, a drip tray, extra O-rings in case you lose one like I did, a 20-micron pleated sediment filter, the filter housing obviously with a wrench that make it easy to install the filter housing and to unscrew it when you have to replace the filter, and a dual action hand pump for inflating the tub. And the dual action basically means that with every full stroke, you push air into the tub or the lid twice. So when you pull the handle of the air pump, you inflate, and when you push it down, you inflate too. And that makes setting everything up super easy. I mean, it takes maybe 30 seconds to a minute to inflate both the tub as well as the lid, thanks to this very powerful pump that it comes with. You also get a duffel bag that allows you to carry the deflated tub and the lid. If you want to bring it along on a camping trip or what have you, you can certainly do that. It also comes with water test strips and non-toxic water filtration or water treatment solutions from Sarona Spa. And those are chlorine-free, so you can use them without, having any negative impact on your skin health, which, I wouldn't want to put in chlorine into my cold plunge. Once you unpack everything, setting up the entire plunge takes maybe 15 minutes or less. What you do is you inflate the tub, you inflate the lid, you hook up or connect the tub to your chiller using the hoses. Just make sure you don't lose any of those O-rings. It comes with some extras in case you do, which I lost one when I first set everything up. So you connect everything, you fill the tub with water, and you turn on the chiller. You obviously connect, the filter housing to the chiller as well. Put in the sediment filter before you do that. And that's pretty much it. Now, one thing that I want to point out is important is make sure that you're happy with the placement, with the tub placement before you fill it with water. Because even though the empty tub weighs 25 pounds, once it has 80 gallons of water, it weighs 800 pounds. So you're not going to be able to move it unless you're a strong man. And even then, it's probably going to be a challenge. So make sure you're happy with the placement before you add water. What I also would recommend is that you sweep the area underneath the tub, because with the 800 pounds pushing down, if there is any sharp object, a nail or a screw or what have you, you might actually puncture the bottom of the tub, and then you have to repair it. Speaking of the tub, it's made out, and the lid as well, it's made of aerospace grade rubber, or PVC actually, a type of plastic, but it kind of feels very rubbery, like a rubber. And it's very high quality commercial grade. So it's unlike some of the cheaper plunges you might find on Amazon, or maybe some of the inflatable toys you use at the pool. It's very thick, very premium quality materials that make punctures and tears and fading from UV light fairly unlikely. But still, with 800 pounds pushing down, make sure there's nothing sharp sticking out underneath to prevent any potential punctures. But setup, super easy, 15 minutes or less, and you're ready to go. Now, it takes a couple of hours to cool the water or heat the water, depending on what you want to do. And as a rule of thumb, if you have water temperature of, let's say, 65 or so degrees and ambient air in the same range, it takes 4 to 5 hours to either cool or to heat the water. I typically fill it up, let it run overnight, and the next morning, whatever temperature is it set to, it has reached the temperature and it's ready to roll. So that's what I would recommend. The chiller that comes with the Inergize tub is fairly powerful. It has 0.8 horsepower, so which is less than some of the other chillers I have at home. But considering the volume of water, the 80 gallons inside of the tub, or 80 plus, maybe 82 or so, it's plenty of performance to cool the water fairly rapidly and to keep it at a consistent temperature. So even if I set, the lowest temperature you can set it to is 37 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 3 degrees Celsius. And if you set it to that, it it sticks to the temperature even with ambient temperature being in the high 90s or even hotter. So here in Georgia, where I live, we regularly get high 90s in summer, sometimes even above 100, and it still keeps the water temperature at about 37, 38 degrees Fahrenheit. So fairly powerful. I also like the filtration system that the chiller provides. It has a combination of a sediment filter. I've mentioned it before. So you have to replace that sediment filter maybe once a month or so, depending on how often you plunge, and also depending on, how tight the lid is. If there is any, a gap or an opening, or you don't put on the lid properly and there is maybe debris or dust or whatever getting in, you might have to replace it more often. We sometimes have landscapers around that area where we have to plunge. And, when they air blow that area, there might be extra debris getting into the tub. And so, you might have to replace it maybe every 3 weeks if you plunge every day. I typically do it once a month, and that's plenty. Now, the second sanitation capability, filtration, not really filtration, but a sanitation capability of the chiller is ozone. So it comes with an ozone capability that treats the water as it goes through the chiller with ozone, and that's meant as a disinfectant. So it kills any organic pathogens, including bacteria and viruses and anything in between. Now, here is the thing. I've actually, in the manual of the Inergize, it recommends to turn off the ozone filtration capability or the ozone sanitation capability because it reduces the noise level of the chiller and it prolongs the lifespan of the chiller, because the company argues that by using those non-toxic water treatment solutions that you get as part of your setup, you don't need the ozone. I tend to disagree. I'd rather rely more on ozone and less on any chemical solution, even if it's non-toxic. But that's just me. I don't think the noise level is anywhere near bothersome. Yes, while the ozone is on, it kicks in every couple of minutes. It's a little bit louder, but not annoyingly so, in my opinion. And I don't think there is any issues with the lifespan of the unit. I've owned several of those chillers that use ozone for several years, and I've never run into any issues. Maybe, in 10, 15 years down the line. But I really like the ozone filtration or the ozone sanitation capability. I think it's better, in my opinion, than any chemical solution. But nevertheless, so the result of using the sediment filter, the ozone, as well as then those non-toxic water treatment solutions is that you don't have to replace the water every couple of weeks. In fact, I replace the water in the Inergize maybe once every 6 months. And I have similar plunges, and with them as well, I replace the water every 6 months. I use those non-toxic treatment solutions every 2 weeks. So I test the water using a test strip. If I see anything is off, I add some oxidizer, which is basically just the hydrogen peroxide, the disinfectant. And I do that every 2 weeks, and that maintains the water quality for several months without me having to replace it. So that's a time as well as a cost saving. Beyond that, the chiller is Wi-Fi enabled. So you can not only set the temperature and a schedule on a mobile app. So it uses the Tuja Smart app, which is a third-party app. It's not a first-party. So it's an app developed by someone else that works with, I guess, the thermostat in the chiller, which is also a third-party component. Inergize doesn't make any of those components. We'll talk about this in a bit. So they source them from third parties, and the Tuja app just happens to work with the electronics inside of the chiller. It's very easy to set it up. You connect it to Wi-Fi, and then you can use the app to set the temperature, to set up schedules. So in my case, for example, I turn off the chiller at 7 p.m. at a time where I don't plunge anymore to save energy. And I turn it back on the next day at 7 in the morning. And by doing so, I save energy. The water doesn't circulate, but the water doesn't heat up enough to warrant having it run 24/7. In other words, when I get down the next morning at 8 p.m. or so, an hour after it turned on, the water is again at my desired temperature. And so, it doesn't have to run the entire time, and I find it really convenient to have it ready when I need it, but then turn it off when I don't, to save energy and to also, make it just quiet overnight then. In terms of build quality, both the chiller as well as the tub are made from high quality premium materials. So as I mentioned already, the tub itself as well as the lid is made out of a high-grade industrial airplane drop stitch PVC. Feels like rubber, but it's a very high-quality material that doesn't puncture and fade easily. You can puncture it. I mean, if you stick it with a knife, obviously it would puncture. If you have a nail underneath and you fill it up with 80 gallons of water. It might puncture as well, but otherwise it'll last for a very long time as a spec. The same goes with the chiller. It's heavy duty. It is heavy, literally. I mean, it weighs 60 pounds, but it has built-in rolls and handles that you can use to just move it around on an even surface. Now, if you want to obviously lift it into the bed of your truck or whatever, you have to deadlift those 60 pounds. But other than that, if it's at a flat surface, you can easily move it around without much effort. I really like that. I mentioned it before, I like the drip tray that the chiller comes with, so you can place it underneath to catch any condensation. That's useful on the outside where you might have, water then on a surface that doesn't take water very well. Especially if you use it on the inside, you definitely want to catch that condensation and not have it on a, wooden floor or whatever, even a concrete floor. I would argue, having water permanently is probably not a good thing. So I really like that drip tray to catch any of the condensation. Now let's talk about pricing. The Inergize Cold Plunge retails, as of this recording at least, for $3,990, so almost $4,000. That's not exactly inexpensive, especially when compared to a DIY solution. If you convert an old chest freezer maybe, or if you get an old barrel and just add ice from Walmart to it, or if you have an ice maker, it's definitely more expensive. However, what you ultimately pay for is the chiller. From a technical perspective, that's really the most expensive component. It's not the tub, it's the chiller. But really what you pay for is the convenience of having your plunge ready when you need it without having to wait for the water to cool down. If you have a regular barrel and you add ice, you have to either go out and get some ice, or go down to your ice maker, scoop out the ice, add it in, and then wait until the water has reach the desired temperature, which is gonna fluctuate. Obviously, you're never gonna have a consistent temperature. With a chiller, it's ready whenever you need it. You don't need to worry about water filtration. You don't need to worry about replacing the water every week or every 2 weeks. You have to do it once every 6 months. So you pay for the convenience, and whether or not that's worth to you $4,000, ultimately depends on how much value your time and the convenience. If you're a busy professional and you only have a few minutes in the morning to cold plunge before heading out to work, you're probably not going to do the, getting ice, adding it, waiting for half an hour, and then jumping in kind of thing. You won't have that time. So in those cases, having a chiller that's ready to roll whenever you are ready, is a no-brainer. Now, here's the good news. I have a discount code, Michael Kummer. I'm going to link it down below and have it down below in the description as well. That gets you $150 off. So it, lowers the pain a little bit, and I appreciate if you use it. It's an affiliate link, so I get some commission and you get a discount, so we both win. But, I think it's reasonably priced, especially when compared to some of the other plunges that I've tested, and some of which look very similar to the Inergize. And I'm going to talk about this next, because if you've been watching some of my videos or reading some of my blog posts, or have, searched for cold plunges that you might want to invest in, you've probably realized that there are a couple of plunges out there that look incredibly similar to the Inergize Cold Plunge. I want to talk about this a little bit because Inergize, much like some of those other brands that have similarly looking plunges, use generic components. None of those brands have developed the design, as far as I know, and the components themselves. They use third-party components and then just put the label on it, which doesn't make, it's not a bad thing by any means. The components are high quality and they work very well, but it's worth pointing out some of the differences between the Inergize and maybe the TheraFrost that I own as well. They look exactly this, or very similar at least. The chillers look very similar, but there are some differences that I want to point out, especially between those two, because those are the ones that I own. The first thing is the Inergize is relatively small. And when I first got it, I'm like, I don't think I'm going to fit in there. I mean, I'm 6 foot tall. I weigh 210, 215 pounds. And I wasn't convinced that I will be able to submerge myself into the water fully, because it measures 51 inches, wide, or, the length is 51 inches by 27 and a half, which is not it's fairly narrow, but it's 30 inches tall. And that's taller than some of the other tubs and plunges that I have that range somewhere from 24 inches tall to 27 inches tall. And the additional 3 inches actually make it possible to submerge myself up to the jawline in water without being uncomfortable. So I can get in, and yes, I cannot, extend my legs. I have to keep my legs bent, obviously, or my knees bent, but I can submerge myself fully in the water because the tub is fairly tall. And the advantage of that is, it's a pro and a con. The advantage of that is that it requires a very small footprint. So if you have a small patio or not a lot of space, or if you want to put it on the inside and you don't have a large room, then the smaller footprint is definitely an advantage. The slight disadvantage of that approach is that getting in and submerging your head underwater, which is something I'd like to do when I get into a cold plunge tub, I just scoot all the way in to submerge my head fully in my face. I can't do that in the Inergize. I have to hinge forward and kind of get my face in the water, which is slightly less convenient, but it's possible. Also from a volume perspective, the Inergize holds 80 gallons of water, whereas the TheraFrost that I have holds 101 gallons of water. So it's bigger, it's wider, it's less tall, and it's maybe more comfortable. Neither of those have a slanted back, so you have to sit relatively upright in both cases. But because the TheraFrost is longer and wider, I can scoot in more and I can actually submerge myself in the water without having to hinge forward. From a chiller perspective, it's the same components on the inside, more or less. The Inergize is a 0.8 horsepower engine, which is enough for the 80 gallons of water. The TheraFrost has a 1 horsepower engine required for, the more water it has to pump and circulate. Now, the difference between those two chillers, there's another difference. One is, the carrying handle or the handle to move them. The TheraFrost has a collapsible handle, whereas the Inergize has 2 fixed handles. The other difference, and that's a big one, I think, more or less big one, is the position of the display, where you can, change the temperature or make other changes to the chiller. And on the TheraFrost, it's located on the top, so it's fairly easy to read. Even not perfectly readable because the display is not very bright. With the Inergize, it's located on the front, so you have to squat down or hinge over to read the display. And because the way it's positioned, it makes it almost impossible to read in bright daylight because of the low brightness, the low contrast, and the positioning is a little bit a pain in the butt. You'd almost rather want to use the app to make any changes. The other difference between those two plunges is the Inergize has a lockable lid, and it not only comes with clips but also with a numeric code that you can set to prevent young kids, for example, from opening or removing the lid and then accidentally falling in. So I really like that. I also like those 2 handles that make it easy to remove the lid. It might sound like not a big deal, but if you plunge every day and you remove the lid every day, at least twice, by removing it, by putting it back, those 2 handles are really convenient, I think. Beyond that, there's a color difference, that might be just a preference. The Inergize is gray, the TheraFrost is black, which one could argue absorbs more sunlight, more of the heat. But again, the chiller is powerful enough to keep the water cold anyway, even with direct sun exposure. There's a big price difference of almost $1,000, that's probably worth pointing out. So the Inergize is a very economic, comparatively speaking, solution. The TheraFrost is bigger, has more water, is maybe more convenient, but it's also $1,000 more expensive. That's something important to consider. My final verdict really is, I think the Inergize has a lot going on for itself. It's a small footprint, fits into even small spaces. It's very powerful, cools the water down to 37 degrees or heats it to 105 degrees if you want to turn it into a hot tub. The chiller is very powerful. It keeps the water clean and sanitary for extended periods, for months really. So you don't have to change the water a lot. I think that if you are not very skilled and don't want to do a DIY solution, if you don't want to convert a chest freezer or build your own, cold plunge, if you just want to buy something that's not exactly cheap, but also not super expensive, something that's, set and forget, that is ready anytime you need it, that doesn't require a lot of ongoing maintenance, I think the Inergize is the right one for you. If you have unlimited budget, if you want to have something maybe even bigger, more comfortable, if there is such a thing as, a comfortable cold plunge, since the water is going to be uncomfortable anyway, but maybe something bigger, maybe something made out of a different material, maybe, stainless steel or an acrylic tub or what have you. Check out some of the other plunges I've reviewed. I'm going to link some of those videos and blog articles down below. But other than that, Inergize is a great solution. I really like it. It's become my go-to plunge lately, and I've been really enjoying it. So let me know what you think in the comments. Like the video if you did, leave a comment, stick around, subscribe, and I hope I'll see you in the next video.